It's now my pleasure to introduce our alumni in conversation. Interviewing tonight will be Christina Vroom from the class of 1996. Christina just began her first term on the Mount Allison Board of Regents. She previously served on the Mount Allison University Alumni Board in various leadership roles, including president from 2009 to 2020. Christina holds a BA and a certificate in bilingualism from Mount Allison University, a DSEF from L'Université de Strasbourg, and a certificate in Spanish from McGill University. Christina Vroom is Associate Director of Bequests and Planned Giving at McGill University. With over 18 years of fundraising experience in annual, major, and planned giving, Christina is a passionate facilitator of conversations and relationships that help donors and organizations achieve their philanthropic goals. In her spare time, Christina is a freelance translator and enjoys traveling. Christina will be in conversation this evening with Dr. Tom Deans from the class of 1984. Did you know, I did not, that over the next 20 years, Canadians will inherit $1 trillion. This evening, Tom, who is an award-winning speaker and Globe and Mail best-selling author, explains how this unprecedented wealth transfer will transform the lives, culture, and in fact, Canada itself. Thought-provoking and contrarian, Tom inspires his audiences to cast an eye forward to their future as both beneficiaries and benefactors, and he makes a powerful case for audiences, regardless of their wealth, to the extraordinary and purposeful lives in the service of others. Tom is currently the president of Détente Financial Press, which specializes in offering advanced executive training for financial institutions, charities, as well as legal and accounting firms. Previously, he worked in banking. He was the CEO of a multinational for almost a decade. He was the president of a railway and chaired a federal government committee on tax credits. His book, Every Family's Business, is an international bestseller and has sold more than 1 million copies in 100 countries to date, and has been called one of the top 10 books business owners should read by the New York Times. His latest book, Willing Wisdom, represents a return to his doctoral research conducted in the US, Canada, and the UK. Tom has been featured in numerous magazines and journals, including Profit, Money Sense, Investment Executive, and the New York Times. He's also a frequent guest on the CBC, Moneyline, and BNN on succession planning, intergenerational wealth transfers, and philanthropic giving. I'm proud to welcome both Christina and Tom to the inaugural In Conversation with Alumni Virtual Speaker Series. Christina, over to you.
Thank you, Carole. Thank you for that kind introduction. Good evening, everyone. Bonsoir tout le monde. I'm delighted to be with you all this evening for what I know is going to be an enlightening conversation with our estate planning expert and fellow alumnus, Tom Deans. We're very happy to have Tom with us for the next hour, so let's get this conversation started. Hi, Tom.
Hi, great to join you.
Great to be here. The title of today's webinar is The Great Canadian Wealth Transfer. Can you give us a brief overview of estate planning today? Are the estate plans of Canadians in good shape?
It's a great place to start. Quick answer, it's a complete disaster. And I hate starting off negatively, but we have an extraordinary situation in this country right now where we have a record amount of wealth that's transitioning. Baby boomers are turning 76 this year. They are the most successful generation in the history of this country. In terms of creating businesses and saving and investing, they were parsimonious. They were incredibly cautious. I mean, think about it. I mean, they're born in 1948. That's the leading edge of the boomers. Yeah. And they, their parents and their grandparents had survived, the First World War, the Great Depression, the Second World War. Like they were born at an interesting time, and they were very, very cautious. And so those folks are getting old, and they are transitioning a record amount of wealth. So today in Canada, $225 million will be inherited today. Tomorrow, And every single day for the next 10 years, it is a tsunami of wealth. And so the reason why I started off saying it's not going great, it's not because of the amount of wealth. It's that there is a lack of preparedness. We have 12.5 million Canadian adults that are missing the most basic and important document in an estate plan, and that is a will.
Yeah.
And so we know that if they don't have a will, they don't have a financial power of attorney, and they don't have a healthcare directive. Usually when we go in for a will, we come out with those 2 bonus documents. And so the state of affairs is not good. And we know that the 12.5 million Canadian adults, roughly, who do have a will, we know that 80% of those documents are badly outdated. We know that there's a very good likelihood that someone has selected an executor. We often select executors who are older than we are. We trust them, they're wise. There's a lot of dead executors, and these documents have never been updated. In 1968, when Bobby Kennedy took a bullet in Los Angeles, I mean, that was a horrific day for Americans. The good news is Bobby Kennedy had a will. The bad news is, who do you think his executor was? It was JFK, assassinated 5 years earlier. No one had updated Bobby Kennedy's will. I mean, what's alarming is that Bobby Kennedy wasn't just a lawyer, he was the Attorney General. Half of all lawyers in Canada don't have a will. Half of all business owners in Canada don't have a will. I think there's something that I think percolates through our popular culture, that we think that, I don't know, wealthy, accomplished business owners, academics, astronauts, really, really bright, accomplished people have all of this stuff buttoned down because somehow they're smart and they have access to better lawyers. There's a lot of theories on why we think the way we do. But the reality is, in many cases, the most financially wealthy and successful people have some of the most disorganized and disastrous estate plans waiting to unfold.
I completely agree with you. I see that actually day in, day out with the individuals that I work with. So I'll ask you, because I know, but what do you think is preventing people from putting these important estate planning documents in place?
Well, studies show that, I don't know if you know this, Christina, but if you are to sit down with your family and talk about your will, and then if you go to a lawyer and then have it drafted and then you sign it and then bring that document home, I don't know if you know this, but studies show that you will immediately die. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
It's a good one. Don't
of,
spread that rumor, Tom. Don't spread it.
There's a lot of superstition. Seriously, there's a lot of people who have never touched a will. They have no idea what one is. There's a little bit of mystique and mythology around wills. So we keep them at bay. And of course, the consequences of holding these superstitious ideas. I mean, nothing would be more ludicrous. It would be like me arguing that if you go and get a will, you can definitely guarantee you can tack on an extra 10 years to your life. I mean, both are ludicrous. But the reality is, I would put superstition number one. Number two is, I don't want to get a will right now because I'm going to sell my business next year. And so that's a major change. So I'll just wait till that's done. Or actually, our daughter is expecting, their first baby. So why would we get a will done now? Because it's just going to be outdated. And so they kick the can down the road. Well, the reality is, I mean, there's always things that are changing in our estate plans. And there's an easy way and inexpensive way of amending those wills. It's called a codicil. And so I think procrastination, kick the can down the road, superstition, procrastination, and then, I'm not kidding, but I would say third is cost.
Yeah, I agree. I hear that all the time.
You know, $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 for a complicated will where you've got maybe holding companies, trust funds, lots of different assets in different countries. Like, do you know what $3,000 gets you if you don't have a will and your family ends up in litigation? $3,000 doesn't even get you a letter to get things rolling. And trust me, it's rolling. The courts right across this country are jam full of families in disputes over cottages and cars and businesses and investments and jewelry and things that actually are of no value but have high sentimental value. Things that are worn close to the body, watches, jewelry especially, are sending the next generation crazy. And they're lawyering up and they're fighting. And it's heartbreaking, particularly when you understand just how complicated estates have become. right?
Yeah.
So we're not just talking about mom and dad's house that
No.
quickly gets sold and then you chop up the check 3 ways. We are talking about assets in different countries. We're talking about investments in different countries. We're talking about art collections that require appraisals. We're often talking about families that have wealth in what I would describe as hard to divide assets. A cottage is a good example. It's not a principal residence. And I don't want to turn this into a tax seminar because a lot of people think that, you know, estate planning is just really about saving tax. That is the easy part. The hard part is actually having conversations with your family to find out which of your children want the cottage. Do anyone want the cottage?
Yeah.
How are you going to jam 4 of your children, who also have 4 children, into a 2-bedroom cottage? There is just a striking lack of conversation around how assets will transition. And consequently, what we're doing is we're doing what we have always done in this country, which is put silence and secrecy at the cornerstone of most estate plans.
Yeah.
And it is causing incredible suffering inside families. And in many cases, that suffering only begins when the last parent dies. And then all hell breaks loose.
Yeah.
And it is chaos. And so at that moment in time where we should be grieving, and in many cases celebrating really well-planned gifts, like planned gifts,
Yep.
what we have, in fact, are families learning for the very first time how their parents are dividing their assets. And it's usually not going well.
No, you're right. It's a drop in the bucket that saves a lot of heartache and a lot of cost as well to do it, to plan it now, as opposed to waiting until the end. Your message is unique because you talk about the connection between estate planning and late in life care. Can you elaborate, on this point, especially in light of the population, the aging population, the global pandemic we've all just lived through, and the rising values of estates in Canada?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I think, in fact, there's a reason why 12.5 million Canadian adults don't have a will. And I think it's because we've been led to believe that estate planning and wills are just about dying, and a will answers the question, who gets my stuff when I'm not here? Well, how exciting is that? Right? You can see why people are, it's like, well, I'll get to that next year. Next year. But the reality is, and I really, I think it's really why the book has done really well, because I flip it around and I say that, in fact, there is a lot of self-interest in estate planning. It's not about you just dying.
No.
There is, remember when I said when you go in for a will, you actually come out with those 2 other documents?
Yep.
Those 2 other documents are very much about the living. A power of attorney, financial power of attorney, is a document that answers the question, who will I appoint to act in my best interest if I lose capacity? Who will write my checks? Who will keep my business going? Who will pay my personal bills, invoices, whatever, until I get better, right? And so, think about COVID. We had parents, grandparents ending up on ventilators, and they didn't have these power of attorney. And so, like, if there was a gift and a silver lining from COVID, is that it really brought, estate planning, wills, power of attorney, and healthcare directives from priority 725 in people's lives to like the top 3 things that were keeping people awake at night. So people made it. We saw will writing improve. That's the good news.
Yeah.
So what I'm really been trying to argue in Willing Wisdom, the book, is that, listen, the biggest beneficiary of my estate plan is me.
Yeah.
Now, a lawyer would say, well, that's actually impossible because a will doesn't come into effect until you're dead, and then your beneficiaries are the real winners. The reality is, it is that financial power of attorney, and it is the healthcare directive. Okay, let's spend a second on what that 3rd document is. That healthcare power, that healthcare proxy, will, sometimes called the living will answer that question: resuscitate, do not resuscitate. Do you know right now, in virtually every major hospital right across the country, there are families who are meeting in crisis rooms, and they are trying to really, amongst the siblings, determine whether or not they should plug or unplug. And it is not going well. Like, you tell me, in the absence of that healthcare directive, how a family is going to pick the right second of the right minute of the right hour of the right day to discontinue their parents' life. Someone will be left second guessing that they didn't move quick enough, they caused their parents to suffer, or they moved too quickly. Yeah. And so I think when families can talk about their estate plans and go one step further and share those documents
Yes.
with the people who matter most in their lives, typically their children and their friends and close family. When they can make that sharing and that disclosure, they are the beneficiary. I have a copy of my parents' healthcare directive, their power of attorney, and their will. They have a copy of mine.
Yeah.
Nothing says that we die in order. It's typically the way it goes, but nothing says we die in order.
Yeah.
Even our children, when they turn 18, we buy them wills. I mean, they're very disappointed. They're hoping for cars. Very disappointed children. The reality is, it's their job to keep it up to date. The law doesn't say, well, you're 18 or you're 19. There's an area of law called for young adults. It doesn't work that way. You're an adult. And I just want to share very briefly that story. I remember sitting in an Air Canada lounge and watching that Humboldt bus crash on the prairies unfold. And I knew there were going to be parents arriving at that local hospital inquiring about the well-being of their children. Some of those kids were over 18. And I like statistically, we know that the likelihood of those kids having wills, power of attorney, and healthcare directives was very, very low.
Yeah.
And so sure enough, those parents were arriving and they were getting nothing from the hospital administrators because of privacy laws. Right. So part of my message, it's estate planning isn't just for really, really old people.
No.
It's for all of our children over 18, whether they have assets or not. Estate planning is more than just the division of assets. It's about being prepared.
I agree. It's also, I mean, I think of those are great examples. And I think of myself as a single individual who is not married. I have no children, but it was important for me to let my loved ones know what my wishes were. To your point about healthcare, whether that's, next week or hopefully in, another 40 years from now, people need to know that. And we have to talk about it today. And they are uncomfortable conversations, but they're very important conversations.
I think they're uncomfortable to start. I think there's a tremendous amount of relief when children finally have a conversation with their parents. Do you know that a recent study showed that 43% of children expect to play a role in their parents' late in life care? And yet 6% of parents think that their children will provide that care. There is a huge gap in expectations between the generations about what that late in life care, that chapter of retirement, where we're lying down. I mean, our hospital system is, despite what we read, actually really good at fixing us up and sending us home to lie down. My last surviving grandparent, class of 36, Mildred Jonah, died in 2011. And she lived, we provided in-home care. We spent $1.5 million of after-tax money providing high quality in-home care in my parents' home. So I watched my parents in their 70s providing care for my grandmother who was 99. Like I've seen this up front and close and personal, and it is exhausting. But what I can say is that there was lots of conversations, lots of sharing of documentation, and lots of preparation for the day when that day finally rolled around. People were prepared for the roles. And it's just something that we're going to find is really, really important in this country. If we're not talking about our wills, we're probably not talking about our late in life care.
No, I agree. And not only are the roles prepared, but you know exactly what the individual who's just passed away wanted. How, what they wanted, a celebration of life, whether they were giving to charity, what to do with their estate. And that's an important piece as well. I've had the benefit of sorry, go ahead.
Well, I think your point is excellent. I was just doing an event not long ago in Las Vegas for the American Funeral Directors Association, large convention, and I can tell you, holy smokes! I went and had dinner with the board of directors after my speech, and I sat during that dinner and I listened to them talking about what they had witnessed in their funeral homes. I always thought that the real kind of Wild West and family dysfunction showed itself for the very first time at the reading of a will. No, it is not in the lawyer's office. It's actually at funeral homes where family are gathering, because the funeral directors actually have a legal responsibility to ask for a copy of the will, because the copy of the will will show who the executor is, and the executor has the legal duty to implement final wishes. So the family is finding out for the first time, in many cases, that mom and dad have selected Mary, but not Billy, to be the executor. And this is all a huge revelation. And so that's how the administration of many estates is starting off with surprises, and while people are grieving, and it's not going well. Anyway, they share one story. I'll tell it. It's very, very brief story. Three sisters show up to a funeral home, and the funeral director asks for a copy of the will. And the three sisters look at each other. Do you have a copy? I don't have a copy. Do you have a copy? She doesn't have a copy. So they said, look, we're going to go back to mom's home. We'll be back in 10 minutes and we'll have a copy of the will, and then we can make the final plans. Well, they go back to the house, and it doesn't go well at all, because one daughter has already been there and stolen the silverware, which gets discovered. Now they start looking for the will. They look in the safe, they look in the top dress drawer in the office. They can't find the will. So they do what a lot of people do. They start going into the air vents. They start ripping drywall off the walls. They start dismantling the house. Finally, they give up. They go back to the funeral home with, construction debris and drywall dust in their hair. It is a disaster. Now there's no will. So now it begins. How do you want to celebrate your mom's life? One says, well, clearly mom wanted to be buried beside dad. And the other one says, well, actually I heard cremation, and mom loved both oceans. She wanted her remains to be divided between the Atlantic and the Pacific. And the other sister goes, well, I heard cremation, but I'll tell you right now, if you divide mom's remains, I will never speak to you again. And guess what? They didn't. They never spoke again. One of those daughters had their way, had their wishes.
Yeah.
They never spoke again. And I learned from the funeral director who was telling this story that they inherited equal number of shares in a local business. Mom ran a business, the biggest business in that small town. And because they never spoke again, the business failed and 100 people lost their jobs.
Oh, wow. That's heartbreaking.
Are you starting to see what happens when we wrap our estate plans in silence?
It's a ripple effect.
It would be the furthest thing that mother would have ever anticipated would happen when she left those daughters having to figure out how to deal with themselves and a business.
Horrible.
So part of what my work it's really focused on business owners. That is where a major amount of wealth is stored in those businesses. And in many cases, just like cottages, businesses trigger enormous amounts of capital gains tax.
Yeah.
And if there is no family conversation to where the liquidity is going to come from when that family gets that letter from CRA, you know what that letter says, right?
Yeah.
It says, we're sorry to hear about your loss.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding. It doesn't say that.
No.
It says, hey, you kids, exactly. Your parents, that their original shares in their business are worth $1. Now they're worth $3,000, and you owe us the difference.
Correct.
Businesses are failing. We know that only a third of family businesses survive after the last parents die, when the business gets inherited to the next generation, because there's been no preparation, no conversation, huge tax liabilities. Same thing with cottages, huge tax bills, no planning, no liquidity. And it's heartbreaking. It's pulling families apart. And of course, I would be remiss if I left out that scenario where parents maybe have a little bit of a strained relationship with one of their children. And so they alter their will late in their life, and they leave more assets to one of their children as opposed to another.
Yeah.
And of course, they don't tell anyone this. And then they ultimately, in the fullness of time, die. And then what happens? The aggrieved child lawyers up and sues who? Their sibling, as if the sibling had designed and engineered the estate plan that way. And in as many cases, it's really unfair. So my comment to a lot of people who are considering making, if there's some kind of tilt in the balance of fairness or equality, that to disclose that. There might be good arguments. These are difficult conversations. Listen, I'm not naive. I know they're difficult, but the alternative, silence, is not going to keep people out of court. But that's
you kind of led right into my next question, which was, why are family meetings so important? But clearly this is part of the, it's not always easy, but and I know you talk about this in your book, and I've read this, but for those of us who haven't, why it's so important to have these family meetings and to discuss all of these aspects.
I think culturally, we're kind of hardwired to treat me with a little apprehension, and which of course is a little odd, right? We tell our children to work hard in school, get good grades. If they get good grades, they get into phenomenal schools like Mount A. right? And if they do really well at Mount A, they get into a graduate school, get into a profession. If
Yeah.
they're really successful, they get great jobs, make lots of money. And if they're even more successful and they have good investments and they're good savers, then they can wrap all that in secrecy and keep it a secret from their children. Like,
Yeah. What happened to transparency and talking to each other and
we
open
want you to
dialogue?
work- We want you to work hard so that you can achieve financial success. But if you do, you must keep it secret.
Yeah.
I don't understand it.
Mm.
That is not how I grew up. I can tell you that my grandfather, Wilfred Jonah, who endowed the Wilfred Jonah Lecture Series at Mount Allison,
Yes.
we knew and participated in the design of that planned gift.
Wow.
And I would go down to Mount A in the early years, and I had the good fortune of having dinner with Mordecai Richler and introducing him, and David Suzuki, and there were moments where I'm thinking, was this really a gift for the university or a gift to me? Because it was such an amazing, well thought out gift where we got to participate, and I could just kind of in my mind celebrate what an extraordinary individual he was. And I don't know, it was an amazing gift. But that was designed that way through lots of conversations and family meetings with our advisors present. This is key.
Yeah.
I think people who approach family meetings and discussions about money like a kind of a do-it-yourself weekend project, it's not going to go well. Probably won't even happen. But certainly by including a trusted accountant, a trusted lawyer, wealth advisor, someone that your family can work with, or someone that will be playing a role in the administration of the estate.
Yeah.
Someone who can sit in that meeting with an agenda and just walk the family through in a very business-like way. I mean, this is the business of family. I think those are tremendous gifts that we give our family. We work hard to create wealth. It's hard to create wealth. It's actually even harder to protect it and transition it wisely.
Do you think that trusted advisors who are invited to these family meetings help in creating sort of a neutral party that maybe if there were discourse within the family members, this individual, because they're external, or do you think that they can sometimes be perceived by family members as someone who's swaying decision making?
Yeah, no, the really good advisors, they operate like Switzerland. They really operate as with neutrality. But there are, I can tell you, my advisor is my parents' advisor. They're still alive, 88 and 83. And that firm advised my grandparents, 3 generations, actually 4, because they're also investing our children's money. 4 generations under administration. There are tremendous advantages for families who use family meetings and actually share the same advisory firms, accounting, legal, and investments. It's kind of a version, and this pains me to say this, but the Americans are so much further ahead of us than we are here in Canada. They use a kind of a multi-family office approach to the creation, protection, and transition of family wealth. Yeah, so we've got some work to do.
I was going to say, I work closely with individuals who are interested in leaving legacies to charities. And I encourage everybody to speak to their advisors, whether that's a lawyer, a notary, a financial person, an estate planner. That said, this is not always easy, right? The conversation, we've talked about this, how it can be challenging. Sometimes family dynamics can challenge even the most successful families. How do you see philanthropy being used to bring families closer together?
Oh, it's such a great question. Part of my work involves giving presentations much like this, but inside a multi-generational family meeting. I ask the family members to read the book, and then I go in just to kind of facilitate the conversation. I never come back for the second meeting. I'm just kind of in and out, one and done, but I'm really just trying to just get that family started. Most families, it's starting is the hard part. Then they find their own legs, they find their own style. There's no 2 family meetings are the same. And I can tell you that once they get started, they're actually, and overcome the fear. Immediately people think someone's dying. If families meeting, right, to talk about money, the reality is if you can reframe it and say, no one's dying, but someone will die eventually. And we just want to be prepared for it.
Right.
Popping out of those family meetings is an incredible sense of relief. There are children who are set to inherit more money than they actually, this is going to sound weird, want or need. And And what they would rather have from their parents is clarity about what the family could work on together as a joint philanthropic project.
Mhm.
I was the chairman of our local hospital foundation, and there would almost never be a year that would pass where we would receive a six-figure gift from someone we'd never met. No idea who they were. No idea how to celebrate that gift. We would reach out to surviving family members and say, can we have what did you have in mind? They were equally flummoxed and surprised by the gift. What a lost opportunity.
Yeah.
What a lost opportunity. So the best gifts are the ones that are really, planned by the family, executed by the family, and provide a role for the family after their parent is gone. I mean, these are great gifts I think these are great ways to remember people.
They are. I think it's also important. I see a lot. I agree with you. I also think it's important too to have the conversation with your kids, for your kids, your loved ones. I shouldn't just say children, for your loved ones to understand why that charity, that organization is important to you, and to be able to explain that and to share that with you while you're alive certainly has a lot more passion behind it than just reading it from a will, where people may be surprised and, oh, I didn't know they were interested in supporting that charity. And I think to your point, but talking about your grandfather, perhaps it's a charity or an organization that your loved ones were not familiar with or didn't realize you were so passionate about, and maybe they might have an interest in it as well. So I think, you can continue that multi-generational conversation. I think that's a great way to do it.
I've also, it's an excellent point. I've also been in family meetings presenting and have been invited to stay and watched that portion of the family meeting that deals with philanthropy. Yes. I was in Chicago once for a family that meets quarterly.
Wow.
A significant family, significant wealth, but they meet quarterly. Chicago seems to be convenient. It's a hub. Some of the kids are in the US, some of the kids are in Canada. Are you ready for this? What they do is like a version of Dragon's Den. They had 3 charities come in and present to the family, and the level of detail and grilling and cross-examination of these charities by the family members. And then after the 3 charities presented, the family would vote and allocate a gift to one of them.
That's impressive.
It was so interesting. But what that is doing is connecting. There were 3 generations, 17 family members. It was connecting the 3 generations really and smart. Teaching the second and third generation really about the importance of analysis and making wise, and it's not just tax. These charitable contributions aren't about tax. Quite the opposite. It is about finding that thing in the family and teaching the next generation about the importance of being diligent with inherited wealth and making wise decisions. So whether that is $1 that family takes out of a holding company and invests it, or $1 they take out of a holding company and buys a car, or $1 that they take out of their holding company to invest in a charity, all 3 things are given the same degree of scrutiny.
That's great.
And I think that is how that family is preparing the next generation to be good heirs.
It's really smart. It's a great way to do it. We have about 20 minutes, and I'm going to suggest that we turn the tables over to Marcy Meekins and see if she has some great questions for us from our, excuse me, I'm having a tickle in my throat, from our crowd this evening. Marcy, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. And I would encourage anybody who has a question to enter that in the chat, in the Q&A function right now. So Tom, let's start with an important question. So should we select a family member to be an executor, or is a professional trustee a better choice?
I have absolutely no idea. But I do know that for you and your family, the answer is in the room. And the answer resides somewhere in the relationship between you and your parents, or my parents and myself. Every family is different. In some cases, you should have one of your children, both of your children, all of your children, none of your children. What I can say is that the most successful families often start their first family meeting by asking that question. And before they expect an answer, they often bring a lawyer into their family meeting, or virtually, just like this, and a lawyer gives a presentation about what it is that an executor does. And I got to tell you, it's not a lot of fun. I mean, there's some people who think, that if their parents select them as an executor, that they love them the most. And the reality is, after you've finished executing your responsibilities, and it comes with legal undertakings, you'll be convinced your parents loved you the least. It is not fun. Very few families, unless they've had lots of family conversations about how long it takes to administer an estate, ask lawyers, accountants, and wealth advisors how many times a client dies, and within days, you have family members phoning saying, hey, by the way, when are we going to get that money? That is not happening in our family. Everyone knows that the administration of the estate, if it goes exceedingly well, will be at least 18 months. For more complicated estates, it's going to be even longer. So managing expectations, but more importantly, having great conversations with your family members about what the duties are, and then having a good open conversation, and then ultimately making a collaborative decision. There's no point secretly assigning the duty of an executor to someone and then keeping it a secret and not even giving them a copy of their will. So, and same thing with power of attorney. Sometimes the power of attorney is the same as the executor, but in some cases it's different. And then power of attorneys are being selected, but they don't even have the document, which causes delay. And usually when power of attorneys are coming into effect, someone has dementia, someone's been in a car accident, someone is incapacitated. Like, we need these documents available. We need them shared prior to the moment that we actually need them. And that's what a family meeting is. It's in the fullness of time, after a couple of family meetings, that would be an aspirational goal, that you would share those documents with the people who could then serve us when we need them.
Can I jump in here for a second and ask you, do you have any thoughts on co-executors, say one family member and then say a neutral party who have to jointly do that work together? That way the perception would be a neutral party adds helps with the neutrality and less favoritism by the family members, say.
It's not really an issue of favoritism. There's not much discretion in the administration of a will. It's more of the speed and the attention to detail for executing the wishes that are in the document. So it's not really the neutrality. It's how well organized are you? Are you getting it done? Are you canceling phone bills? Are you selling homes? Are you disposing of other assets so that they can be divided? Like, it is just, whatever is going on, it is setting expectations that's actually the important part, so that people aren't thinking that, the executor is taking too long and running off with the money, which they can't do. So having a good family conversation about what an executor does and what they can't do, so that people make better decisions. I don't want to give legal advice, but I can tell you right now, we actually removed my brother from my parents' will as co-executor. He lives in the US. So that would subject my parents' Canadian assets to US tax laws. So we made that change not for neutrality purposes or fairness or equality. But here's the point: it was discussed. He knows. He participated in the conversation and agreed. So those are the kinds of things. Can you imagine? So the opposite would be to make that decision but not tell him, and he finds out when he's grieving, right? Which is quite frankly, the usual approach.
Agreed. Sorry, Marcy, go ahead.
All right, we've got lots of really great questions coming in. So the next one is, you talk about bringing transparency to estate plans. What if I change my mind and I want to change my will?
Absolutely. So the disclosure in a family meeting about your current will never precludes, a change. Your financial position could change. Your beneficiaries' relationships could change. Just because you disclose what your will says today doesn't handcuff you from making any changes in the future, including your philanthropic gifts. So absolutely. I mean, what we're trying to do, certainly in our own family, is be prepared. I mean, my wife travels with me. I mean, I have had 2 close friends who died with their spouse at the exact same time. One in a car accident, one in a small engine plane crash in BC. 2 couples. So if in the event that happens in my family, we want our kids to be ready. We want them to have a copy of our will. They want to know, we tell them what our assets are, where they are, but they also know that could change. And they also know that if we lived like my grandmother did to 99, that disclosure, that number that they just saw in terms of our personal net worth could be materially smaller. That $150,000 a year for our healthcare will probably be $500,000 a year to provide high quality of in-home care when we are in our 90s. So there's always context with disclosure around financial assets.
Great. So could you talk a bit, Tom, about family businesses and passing on ownership to the next generation, especially where some members of the next generation work with the business and some don't, and how that ownership structure would continue?
Yeah, I mean, this is really the subject of my first book, Every Family's Business. And oh boy, those baby boomers that I told you are turning 76 this year, they are business owners in record numbers. And they did what my father and grandfather and great grandfather did, who all had businesses. And I'm a business owner. I do the same thing. When business owners make money, what we often do is we plow those profits back into the business, and we increase our retained earnings and the equity in our business. We don't do this for 1 year. We do this for 20 and 30 and 40 years. And we build incredible, but often illiquid wealth in these family businesses. And 90% of businesses in Canada are family owned and controlled. Like, they're everywhere. I thought when I wrote my book about family businesses, I was writing about this small little niche. We all kind of carry around ideas of what a family business are, but they are public companies, they're private companies, they're billion-dollar companies, they're tiny little corner stores, they're restaurants, import, export, farms are family businesses. They're everywhere. And everywhere I go, business owners do the same thing. They hoard their wealth inside their business, and then they fail to really articulate how it is that business will transition. And so what they often do, and I'll give you a hint. Yeah, nothing. Absolutely nothing. And they turn 70 and 80 and 90 years old. And they have these businesses that are worth a fantastic amount of money. And these are businesses that are often really reliant and dependent on the founders' participation, leadership, institutional knowledge, and these businesses are failing. So what is happening is that business owner has a 50% chance that they're going to die intestate, that is, die without a will. And then what happens is the shares then transition to their surviving spouse, who often doesn't have knowledge of the operating business. And then, of course, can you imagine the stress of trying to run a business? You don't know the lenders, you don't know the employees, you don't know the customers. Key employees get nervous, they leave, the business starts to spin out of control and fail. And then often, they die with stress. And then what happens? The shares go down to the children in equal amounts, thrusting brothers and sisters into business together as equal partners. It doesn't work.
No, you'll have some interested, some not interested. Yeah.
And guess what do the kids who are not interested want from their brothers or sisters who are interested? And I'll give you a hint. It rhymes with funny.
Yeah, money to be paid out.
They want it quick, and they have often inflated ideas of what that business is worth. And then here we go again, families lawyering up.
Yeah.
And fighting in open court over the ownership of their parents' business. It is not working.
Mm-hmm.
Not working. And it's heartbreaking to watch families buckle under that stress. All preventable. One of my favorite lines in Willing Wisdom is that silence is the great destroyer of family wealth. It is the great destroyer of family relationships. It's the opposite. It's counterintuitive. We believe that if we were to sit our family down and talk about money, that it's going to end badly. The reality is, it is the silence that's creating the problem.
Communication is key to so many aspects of our lives.
Yeah, and it's hard for business owners to relinquish control, especially founders, because they learn from an early age that it is control that is at the center of their success.
Right.
When you have voting control of your business, you can make decisions. It's not a democracy. You don't vote. Not everyone is paid the same in a company. It's a hierarchy. It's a meritocracy. The person with control makes decisions. And if you do well and make enough good decisions, you create wealth. And then I come along and I write this book and say, hey, you aging business owner, you really must voluntarily relinquish control and answer the question, how will the ownership of your business change? That's an estate planning question. Because no one can force them. The lawyer can't force them, the accountant can't force them. It's very hard to voluntarily relinquish control over something you've worked hard to control.
Yeah.
But really successful families do. They do. And they answer the question, who will be the new owner of my business?
Yeah.
Who? It will be someone. It will be a family member, key employees, a competitor, private equity, someone. But doing nothing and not dealing with the ownership transition and dying and leaving other family members to clean up your mess. I tell business owners all the time, you'll be remembered.
Yeah.
Just not fondly.
Not for the right reasons.
Now, Tom, how do you go about building the right team? How do you find the people when you don't really know anybody well enough in your area?
Well, I think like any business owner or any family member, talk to other people in your community who have had family meetings. By the way, this is happening. You're not going to read about it. You're not going to read about a family who meets annually with their advisor with an agenda to get out in front of the issues that I've described over the course of the last hour. That's boring. Let's talk about a family that's well organized and planned and has lots of transparency and lots of collaboration, and they're very deliberate about finances and their charitable giving. What do we read about? What do we watch nonstop on Netflix? Succession, Bloodline, going back to the 80s, Dallas. Culturally, we love watching families of significance who have created wealth destroy themselves. It's part of our culture. And we're left with this idea that that's the only way forward. The reality is there are lots of families who are doing exactly what I've described tonight. And they've spent some time asking people in their community what financial advisor feels comfortable moderating, facilitating a family meeting. And they do their due diligence and they find that advisor. Not all advice. There's over 30,000 financial advisors in Canada. There's not a lot that can really do a great job of what I've described tonight, but they're out there. They're out there in virtually every community. Just do your work. You'll find them. And you'll find them if you ask your financial advisor if they would be willing to facilitate a family meeting, and they just kind of look at you like, what is that? You kind of have your answer.
I had one individual I worked with who actually did their research and asked for references, other clients that they could speak to see if they were a great financial advisor, an estate planner, they enjoyed working with them, were they helpful, so I recommend that as well. Do your research, go ask for recommendations from other clients.
Oh, I love it. No, absolutely. And not just financial advisors, but there are accounting firms and even lawyers. Lawyers are a little bit different. There's a lot of people who think that lawyers are financial planners. Like, they're not. Lawyers as a profession take instruction. Like, they're very transactional, not a criticism. It's just the way that the profession is designed. But I see lawyers in family meetings all the time. The lawyer that will be there who has drafted the will, he's there to answer questions from beneficiaries.
Yeah.
Even difficult questions. I mean, there are some families, and I would be remiss if I didn't make the point, that families are complex.
Mhm.
And I don't want to paint a kind of Norman Rockwell painting where every family has these fabulously educated, high-achieving children who could take an inheritance and do great things with it. There are some families where there is concern about what a significant gift would do to their lives.
Mhm.
That family in Chicago that I referenced, that family meeting where I attended and presented to, I learned that G2, the second generation, had inherited $80 million, and they turned that into many billions. I recently met someone who inherited $10,000, and they were dead in 30 days because of their addiction.
Mm.
Inherited wealth will release potential. It will help fund new businesses, education, healthcare, philanthropy, extraordinary things will come from that gift, or it will accelerate demise. It seldom equivocates. It will do typically one or the other. And I think for those of us who are contemplating our estate plan, I think it behooves us to understand that wealth is energy. It represents the energy of our life. And I think it behooves all of us to explore what is going on in our family. How can we structure our estate plan so that it does release potential? And where there are concerns, that we can lean on our advisors to create things like a trust or a reliance on philanthropy to protect that next generation really from themselves.
Yeah, good point.
So the next question, Tom, is about an alter ego trust. So specifically in a situation in which you have no children or grandchildren, and the folks who are left in your family really don't need to inherit that wealth. Would an alter ego trust be appropriate in that circumstance?
Yeah, I really don't want to give financial advice, but what I would say is the same logic and prescription that I'm making for a will also applies for a trust. That the disclosure to the beneficiary of what is coming their way. In other words, the same kinds of logic of the importance of communication and disclosure that applies to gifts coming through wills versus trust, alter ego trust, charitable remainder trust, whatever trust structure you decide on, really important that the beneficiaries are prepared and not surprised. That's also a great gift to the trustee. That is a tricky job, managing expectations. So the more that, the beneficiaries, understand what their duties and responsibilities are for inherited wealth, whether it's an institution or an individual, same thing with an executor, setting our executors up to succeed.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, seriously. Boy, it's a tough job if you're flying solo and no one knows what the will says. Tough job.
So here's a really great question. And how do executors learn the detailed steps that they need to take to settle an estate?
Yeah, so there's some online resources now and designations for people to receive support. Yeah, and training, little training modules, checklists. Yeah, that's come a long way. And sometimes when people go through that kind of certification and understand what the duties are, they actually decline the role. Yeah, for big complicated estates, it is not shocking that we're seeing a lot of people use professional trustees, trust companies, for example, to even though there's a cost, they understand that there's a much larger risk to the estate if siblings lose their mind and lawyer up and, for example, sue a family member who has been appointed sole executor.
A great place to start for that, I would say, is your provincial government. They have great websites in giving you sort of initial steps on what to do if you're an executor, or in Quebec, we call it a liquidator. But to start there, and to your point, Tom, there are great resources, individuals who will do it for you.
And for everyone, one of my final messages would be, please, this is not the place to cut corners financially. Please do not go. I keep picking on Staples, God bless them, but please don't go to Staples and buy a will kit for $20. This is not the place to save money. Do your research, find that estate lawyer in your city, your town, your community that specializes in estate law, does it all day long. This is one very complicated and quickly changing area of the law. Someone who can answer questions about how to deal with assets that may be in the US, how to deal with assets that are in different provinces, some of the pitfalls and concerns about having a co-executor who is named in your will but lives out of province. There is a myriad of minefields waiting for you. So please get good legal advice in your community, in your province where you and your assets are domiciled.
Agreed. Marcy, I'm looking at the time. Maybe we'll go with one more question for Tom and then we'll sort of wrap it up.
Perfect. So here's an interesting question, and I'm sure it's on many people's minds. What's the average cost per year of later in life care that someone should plan for?
Well, okay, so there's a huge range depending on the quality of care you want. So the example that I gave was for in-home care, 24 hours, 365 days. That's going to run you about $235,000 to $250,000 a year now. And then you could go down to a nursing home for about $4,000 to $5,000, $60,000, a year. So that's kind of the continuum, both ends. And there's lots in between. There's hybrid models. There is some situations where family members are stepping up and providing a portion of the in-home care. And I'm really glad you mentioned that, because what is happening is that elderly people are often changing their will late in life to compensate the one child who has stepped up to provide the majority of late in life care, but doesn't say anything to the other beneficiaries. So when that person dies, they find out that the caregiver is getting more, or the bulk of the estate. And then what happens? People lose their mind and they lawyer up. So I talk about this in Willing Wisdom. I talk about that very clearly because it is a growing problem. And really the remedy is, in our family, what we have done is we've provided like an honorarium in real time, in real dollars, to the person who's providing the care, or not the care, but the oversight. Who's scheduling the caregivers? Like, even if you've got full-time caregivers, 24 hours a day, 365, someone still has to hire them and pay them and oversee them. So that role in our family, the person who provides that oversight or that care, they're paid in real dollars for it. It's not the motivator. But what we don't do is alter the will and tip the balance of equality for the caregiver. That's a key point.
That's a good point. Thank you, Marcy, for giving us our questions. I'm sorry to those of you who didn't get your questions answered, but we'll see what we can do about answering those for you. I want to thank you so much, Tom. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you with us this evening. Once again, I've learned a tremendous amount. In fact, I just want to say that hearing you speak several years ago at a conference inspired me to read Willing Wisdom and to share that book with my family and start conversations. So it's actually a wonderful book. A special note and thanks to you, Tom, for giving 100 copies of Willing Wisdom to Mount A to give to our first 100 registrants of tonight's event. If you would like to purchase a copy of Willing Wisdom, you can do so by visiting willingwisdom.com. I also want to say a big thank you to all of you who joined us this evening for the inaugural In Conversation Speakers Series. We hope you enjoyed your time with us. That is all for us tonight. If you have any questions or you're interested in more information about estate planning, please don't hesitate to reach out to the Mount A Alumni Office team. They are always eager to help in any way that they can. And I thank you very much. Take care, everybody, and go get your wills.
Thanks, Christine.